This video is about how district leadership can empower EL, ENL, ML, bilingual departments to lead for compliance and equity. This is a supplemental video to the webinar on civil rights compliance regarding meaningful communication with multilingual families. I'm doing this separate from that webinar because there was so much to cover in 1 hour, but I still wanted to get you this information. So the question we're seeking to answer for leadership is, what can you provide? How do you know what to greenlight? How do you know what to prioritize so that your English learner or multilingual learner or whatever the name your district has for that team, so that they have what they need, so that they can fix the systems and make sure that your district is compliant with civil rights regarding meaningful communication and providing an equitable experience and results for kids. So this all falls under that third layer of how we do better in this work. So there are 5 things that I'll name that you can provide for your EL or ML leadership. The first being the budget for tools and resources. So these tools and resources might include things like a telephonic interpretation service, which is usually a by the minute cost, a professional translation, which might be done in-house or outsourced to some agency outside the district. There's an asterisk there next to in-house because, as we learned in the webinar, there are requirements from the Department of Education and Department of Justice as to who is doing these translations. So we don't want to just have any bilingual staff member doing these translations. It's really important that the person doing this has been trained, has been screened in some way to make sure that they have the skills necessary. And in some cases, there will be ethics and confidentiality issues related to translation because there will be some documents that they have access to that are confidential. Another example would be an in-person interpretation service, or again, in-house staff. That in-house staff similarly would need to be trained, screened, and determined to have the skills in interpretation necessary to be competent resources for families. And there may be additional tools to enable competent digital translation. I'm not talking about Google Translate. I'm talking about platforms that this school may already use to send text messages or emails or digital newsletters to families. And this depends on your specific situation, what tools you're already using, what systems you have in place, but that's a possibility. So this can be really intimidating for schools fiscally if this is not something that they've spent money on before. And that is understandable because we have to be responsible stewards of the funds that we have and make sure that we are spending that money in a way that optimizes for outcomes for kids. And so this is a crass line, but paying for all of these tools are certainly cheaper than a lawsuit. They save us money in the long term, and they definitely help us get to strong student outcomes, inclusive and equitable experiences for families, and compliance with civil rights law. We cover all of the reasons why in the webinar, but it comes down to the fact that this is the cheaper route, and when there are things that become very expensive, there are different ways of looking at it to say, how can we achieve a strong outcome for the most most fiscally responsible way? In my 2-day workshop and PLC and Action Lab on the topic of multilingual communication, which I'll share more about at the end, we do address this piece. So in our 2-day workshop, participants will do an audit of the tools that they have adopted or created to make sure that they are actually up to snuff and meeting the needs of the district. In the PLC and Action Lab, we do that as well, but we go deeper because it's a long-term program. And participants will not only complete the tool audit, but will review the alternatives available to those tools and make recommendations to the districts that are based not just on their own research, but we get to look at the whole group's research and their experience with those tools so that we have as much information as possible to make an informed decision. We also create additional tools that can close those implementation gaps in the school. So examples of that might be a pathway or a mechanism for staff to request interpretation of documents or to request in-person interpretation at a meeting or an event, etc. The second thing that EL and ML leadership need from you is time for all staff PD sessions. I know that this can be a tricky ask because there is so much PD needed and seemingly so little time. But this is a really, really critical piece, and I can speak from it years of experience that without this piece, we are not going to see significant movement when it comes to compliance with multilingual family communication. My recommendation, the framework that that I have used and that has been proven to be effective, means that the launch year of this program would be a 90-minute summer session for all staff. And in the future, it would just be for new onboarding staff so that they are caught up with what they need to know. And in that first year, 2 30-minute refreshers leading up to parent-teacher conferences. I would say in the month leading up to parent-teacher conferences, because people simply forget, and parent-teacher conferences are a really crucial moment in the school year to make sure that we're doing communication right, both getting families to school to attend those conferences and then conducting those conferences in a way that's actually meaningful for kids and families. In the 2-day workshop, we will cover best practices for these PD sessions. I led years of ineffective PD on this topic before I learned what actually changes staff behavior um, that I can implement in my PD sessions. So we cover those best practices in the 2-day workshop so that participants leave with the information they need to then implement well. In the PLC and Action Lab, of course, we cover best practices, but also in our time together, each person will create their sessions. They'll have a session that they can provide to building leadership or administration and a session that they can provide to all staff, as well as their refresher sessions. They will be able to implement the best practices and they will be able to receive feedback on their sessions to make sure that they are actually on track to use that time wisely, right? So if you're giving them 90 minutes in the summer and then 2 30-minute segments, you really want to be sure that when they lead those sessions, that they are accomplishing what they set out to accomplish. The third thing they need from you is time to meet regularly with building leadership. Now, this isn't time with you necessarily, but your support in getting them this time may be necessary depending on how your district is structured, but it will certainly help if you say, hey, building administration, you are going to have to be meeting regularly with the leaders of the EL or ML or bilingual team. My recommendation is 5 45 to 60-minute meetings that happen, the first one being at the beginning of the school year, and then the next 4 happening at the end of each quarter. What that does is it allows the EL and ML team to work in partnership with building leadership and creating that culture that all of our families are all of our families. It will allow them to set goals for the coming quarter related to multilingual communication, which is something that I teach them how to do, and then how to compare the data from the quarter behind them to the goals that they set so that they can see if they are on track or not. The good news here is that as teams perform well, they will need less of that time. So they may not need the full 45 to 60 minutes. They can either start shortening their meeting time or they can then use the remaining time to discuss more productive things like how are we working together to support multilingual learners in other ways or include multilingual families in other more innovative ways and go beyond the basics of communication. In the 2-day workshop, we go over the how do you actually audit the data that you have for your communication systems, and then how do you lead effective meetings with building administration. And in the PLC and Action Lab, we do those things. We also build out a year-long calendar so that leadership knows this is when I'm meeting with leaders. This is when I'm conducting audits. This is when I'm sending previews to administrative teams of our agenda so that they feel included and prepared for when we sit down to meet together. We will actually conduct audits to discover any gaps that exist in our current data system, so that we can work to close those. We will prepare the preview communication, again, to loop in admin teams so we aren't springing something on them when we sit down at a table, but they are true partners with us. We will prepare meetings. We will get feedback on our preparation for those meetings. And we're also going to include a focus on celebrating successes, because they will happen, as well as pushing for improvement, so that we can look at both pieces, because they really are both necessary for creating a healthy, strong culture around improving family communication. The fourth piece they need from you is a designated person, possibly people, to lead on this topic. So I'm not talking about the actual translators or interpreters, but the people who are leading the systems. So they are overseeing the fulfillment of requests, for example. They are training staff in the professional development capacity that we've discussed already. They are conducting the audits of the data or overseeing the audits, and they are leading for accountability in the district. So that is what I'm referring to here, but it's important to say you are the person, or you are the people who are responsible for leading in this way, and I'm going to make sure that you have the resources and the tools that you need to do that effectively. Now, the 2-day workshop and the PLC and Action Lab are the only training that support leaders in that third layer of compliance and equity implementation. There's PD out there on educational interpretation or translation, for example. There are trainings available on the pieces, especially the tools, but there is no other training that is available to these leaders on how do you actually lead systems that cause staff to use the tools that you have and the people that you have in an appropriate, equitable, inclusive, compliant way. Now, the fifth piece is a recommendation. This is not a necessity, but it certainly will make the implementation of this launch year go more smoothly. And that is a small budget for the ELML team to recognize staff successes. So in the first 1 to 2 years, I would recommend doing this. And the budget can be something like $500 to $800 for every 5 schools in your district for the whole school year. But this is just something that allows them to publicly acknowledge, hey, you as a team, or you as a campus, or even you as individuals did a really great job including multilingual families in your communication this quarter or this semester, and I want to recognize you and thank you and express my gratitude for that. And that positive reinforcement helps the snowball effect. So to get more information on the 2-day workshop, or Masters of Multilingual Communication 2-day workshop, which takes place on November 14th and 15th of 2024, you can go to togetherlanguage.com/workshop. And to get more information on the PLC and Action Lab, which runs from September 2024 through July 2025, you can just go to togetherlanguage.com/PLC. Now, the process to actually make this happen is the first step is to schedule a free call. We will just have a friendly chat. You will be able to ask questions. I'll be able to give you more details that you need to know so you can figure out if our programming is a good fit. That you can schedule that call by going to togetherlanguage.com/call. Now, that step is optional. So if you know from the information that you have already that one of these programs is a good fit for you, you don't have to schedule that call. But I know for the majority of districts, that is going to be a necessary step to determine, like, is this really an appropriate use of our funds and our time and our staff capacity? As a side note, at the time of recording this, I'm very close to my due date to have my second baby. So there is a long period of time this summer when my calendar is blocked off for conducting calls. So I apologize for that obstacle if that is a step that you want to take. Um, Go ahead, my calendar opens up at the end of that maternity leave, and you can schedule a call at that time. Or you can send me an email, but if you would please put important in the subject line, because there will be a lot of emails coming into my email, and I want to be able to filter for the ones that I really need to follow up on when I do sit down to my computer. The second step is to simply enroll. You can enroll as many team members as you want. You can do that online. The websites to the left there will take you where you need to go to enroll online. Or depending on the finance process at your school district, you can also request an invoice from me. That may be a preference for the PLC option. And then the third step is to enjoy the peace of mind that your district is doing right by kids and families and that you are on sound legal footing. So that is all the information that I have for you today. Thank you so much for your time to learn more about this topic. I appreciate you, and your students and families are lucky to have you.